Welcome back, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Henry and the alien Queen Lianna. So sit back and get ready for an adventure with sci-fi traveler. Enjoy the show. The alien queen walked past all the nobles and stopped in front of a human man. Will you dance with me? Henry had attended exactly one formal event in his entire life before this one, and it had been his cousin's wedding, where the sharpest political intrigue of the evening concerned which aunt got seated nearest the open bar. So he was, by any honest accounting, spectacularly underqualified for whatever was unfolding around him tonight aboard the imperial flagship Meridian. The ballroom did not help matters. It was the sort of room that made a person feel personally apologized to by the universe for being so small. The ceiling arched up so high it very nearly had its own weather, and from it hung the chandeliers, great slow-turning clouds of frozen light, each one a captive galaxy that shed no heat and threw no shadow, so that every soul in the hall glowed softly and flatteringly, as if the architecture had been engineered specifically to make terrible decisions look graceful. Henry was fairly certain his presence here was itself a terrible decision, though not his own. Somewhere in the vast bureaucratic gut of the empire, a clerk had matched the wrong name to the wrong invitation, and a water reclamation engineer who fixed the ship's least glamorous plumbing had been summoned to the most glamorous night of the court's calendar. He had considered explaining the error to someone official. Then he had seen the guest list, tasted the free food, and elected to remain a clerical mystery for as long as the buffet held out. So he stood pressed against a marble pillar the approximate size of a small moon, nursing a drink whose name had 11 syllables and 3 sounds his mouth could not physically produce. It was violet, it fizzed, and it tasted faintly of thunderstorms and regret. He had decided he liked it, which he suspected was a bad sign. Around him, the nobles performed. There was no other word for it. The Vale aristocracy did not simply attend a party. They competed at it. Lords in living silk drifted past in careful orbits, laughing at jokes that hadn't been funny in 3 centuries, angling their best profiles toward the great marble staircase like sunflowers tracking a sun that hadn't yet risen. Every gemstone in the room had been positioned to catch the light. Every spine was bowed at precisely the angle that suggested devotion without risking a wrinkle. Henry watched one baroness spend a full minute arranging her expression into something that said serene and available, and felt, for her sake, a small stab of second-hand exhaustion. Then the music changed, thinned to a single-held note, the way a room does when it collectively remembers to breathe, and the whole court turned as one toward the staircase. Queen Lianna descended. Henry had heard the stories, of course. Everyone aboard had. But the stories had failed, rather badly, to mention that she appeared to be wearing light itself. Not fabric that reflected it, not thread that shimmered, actual woven light, poured over her shoulders and gathered at her waist and falling in slow, luminous folds that moved a half-second after she did, as though her gown were considering each step before agreeing to follow. Her skin held a soft violet glow, the warm color of a planet's edge just before dawn, and the only feature that marked her as anything other than impossibly quietly human were her ears, long and delicately pointed, tilted just slightly, catching the chandelier light like 2 small listening blades. She was breathtaking. She was also, Henry noted, entirely, magnificently unimpressed by every single person waiting to breathe her name. The lords began their bowing the moment her slipper touched the ballroom floor. She walked past the first without a glance, past the second, whose bow was so deep Henry worried for his lower back, past a duke, a general, 3 glittering princes, and a marchioness who had clearly rehearsed. Lianna crossed the entire length of that vast hall in a straight, unhurried line, and the court turned with her like a field of grass following a wind, each noble certain that the line ended at them. The line ended at Henry. He had time for exactly one coherent thought, which was, "Oh no, she's coming toward the buffet," and one incoherent one, which was mostly the sound a kettle makes. And then Queen Lianna of the Vale Imperium stopped directly in front of him. The one outsider in the room, the human, the plumbing engineer glowing violet from someone else's cocktail, and looked up at him with eyes the deep gold of a good decision made too quickly. "Will you dance with me?" she asked. The gasp that went through the court was so total, so unanimous, that the chandeliers seemed to flicker with it. Somewhere behind Henry, a nobleman made a small strangled noise, as though he had just watched his life's ambition dance off a cliff. Henry looked down at his 11-syllable drink. He looked at the Queen. He was fairly sure in that moment that he should have read the fine print on the invitation. For a moment Henry weighed his options, which were, say yes to the Queen or say no to the Queen. He was an engineer. He understood load-bearing situations, and this one was clearly rated for exactly one answer. "I'd be honored," he said, and then, because his mouth had apparently decided to keep going without consulting him, "Though I should warn you, I dance the way a chair falls downstairs." Something flickered across Lianna's face, surprise, he thought, and then, unmistakably, amusement, quickly folded away behind royal composure. She held out her hand. He set down his impossible drink on a passing servant's tray with the guilty haste of a man abandoning the only friend he'd made all evening, and took it. Her fingers were warm. That was the thing that undid him a little. He'd half expected a queen woven from light to feel like light, cool and untouchable, but her hand was just a hand, warm and real and closing around his with a grip that meant business. The music, which had been holding its breath along with the entire court, exhaled into something slow and grand, strings and things that were not quite strings winding up toward the frozen galaxies overhead. She led. He was grateful she led. They moved out onto the marble floor, and the sea of nobles parted around them and reformed at a careful distance, every face arranged into the particular expression of people watching a building burn down and trying to look delighted about it. "You're doing that thing," Lianna murmured, "where you count under your breath." "I'm on 4, Henry admitted. 4 is a very stable number. I'd like to stay near it." "Then let me give you something to think about instead of 4. She turned them effortlessly, and her light-woven gown swept a slow arc across the floor. Her voice dropped, pleasant and conversational, the tone of a woman commenting on the weather. "Among my people, when a queen crosses a hall to choose her dance, it is not a small thing. It's a declaration, binding, in fact. The man I dance with tonight is publicly named my intended consort." Henry's foot found 5, 6, and a step that was not part of any known dance. "I'm sorry, you're what?" "Consort." She said it with maddening serenity, guiding him back onto rhythm as though his existential crisis were simply a slight tempo problem. Or if the court refuses to accept the match, which, looking at their faces, is looking likely, then the declaration inverts. You become fair game. Any noble with ambition may challenge for my hand by removing the obstacle standing in the way of it. A graceful turn, that would be you're the obstacle. I've been an obstacle for approximately 90 seconds. You've been an obstacle very handsomely, she offered, as if this were a comfort. Henry did a rapid piece of mental arithmetic that had nothing to do with dance steps. He had walked into this room a man whose greatest enemy was a corroded valve in Water Reclamation Sector 9. He had, in the span of a single song, become either engaged to an empire or condemned to be hunted across it by everyone in the room currently smiling at him. And he had not yet finished his drink. The drink now felt like a genuinely unresolved tragedy. "I feel," he said carefully, "that this is the kind of information that traditionally comes before the dance, on a form, with a signature line and possibly a lawyer." "If I'd told you before," Lianna said, "would you have said yes?" "Absolutely not." "Then you understand my timing." And there, again, that flicker at the corner of her mouth, the almost smile of someone who had spent a very long time not being allowed to find things funny and was quietly delighted to have found something. Her pointed ears caught the chandelier light as she tilted her head, considering him with those deep gold eyes. You're not panicking. I expected panicking. Everyone panics. Oh, I'm panicking, Henry assured her, executing what he privately felt was a heroic recovery from a near collision with her hem. I'm just doing it very slowly and with excellent posture. It's a specialized skill. Engineers panic on a delay so the numbers still come out right. Across the hall, one nobleman was not bothering to hide anything at all. He stood rigid at the edge of the floor, resplendent in silver, his face the specific shade of a man watching someone else win a thing he had considered already his. When Henry's gaze accidentally met his, the lord did not look away. He smiled. It was the worst smile Henry had ever received, and Henry had once told a superior officer that his flooding problem was user error. That one, Henry said quietly, silver staring. Looks like he wants to fold me into a small square and mail me somewhere cold. Lianna didn't need to look. That's Lord Cassius. He expected to be standing where you're standing. The music swelled toward its final turn and she drew close enough that only he could hear. So, now you know the stakes, engineer. You may still refuse me even now and take your chances with the court's mercy. A beat. They have none if that helps you decide. It doesn't, Henry said, but somehow I'm not surprised. He held on and they finished the dance. The final note faded, and the court did the thing courts do when they have witnessed something scandalous and are pretending they have not. They burst into a polite, poisonous applause, each clap measured to the precise decibel of how lovely, while the eyes above the hands said how dare he. Lianna acknowledged none of it. She simply kept Henry's hand, turned, and walked him off the floor and through a tall arch into a gallery beyond, and the guards at the arch stepped aside so smoothly that Henry understood this had not been improvised. The queen had planned an exit before she'd planned the dance. The gallery was quieter, cooler, lined with windows that were not windows but the raw black of space itself, stars hanging so close and so still that Henry felt he could reach through and stir them like sugar. Lianna finally released his hand and let out a breath, not a royal breath, just a tired human one. And for the first time all evening, she looked less like a woman, woven from light, and more like a woman who had been on her feet for hours in shoes that were winning. You want to know why, she said. It wasn't a question. I have a short list of questions, Henry admitted. That one's near the top. It's just under is anyone going to try to kill me tonight, which I notice you haven't answered. Yes, she said. And now the why. She moved to the black window and looked out at the stars, and her glow softened against the dark. I read your reports, Henry. Henry blinked. My reports, the water reports. Sector 9 efficiency logs. Reclamation variance filings. Your maintenance requisitions, all 400 of them, including the one where you spent 2 paragraphs politely explaining to a supply officer that the part he'd sent was, and I'm quoting you, the correct part for a different and worse ship. She glanced back at him and there was no mockery in it, only something careful and assessing. Do you know how much paper crosses my desk in a cycle? Petitions, flatteries, marriage proposals disguised as trade agreements. Every word of it written by someone who wants a thing from me and has spent a fortune learning how to hide it. And then, in the middle of all of that, a set of the most boring documents in the empire, honest to the decimal, unbribable, written by a man who plainly did not know his queen would ever read them and would have been horrified to learn it. I'm horrified now, Henry offered, for the record retroactively. You want nothing from me. She said it simply, and Henry realized it was the whole point, the entire architecture of the evening resting on that one plain beam. Do you understand how rare that is where I stand? I am surrounded always by people calculating me, and I have gotten very, very good at reading the calculation, but I could not find yours. So either you are the most dangerous man in the empire, hiding your want better than anyone alive. I want to go back to my quarters and lie down. Or, she continued, the almost smile surfacing again, you are exactly what you appear to be, and I have not stood in front of exactly what they appear to be in so long that I forgot what it looked like until I found 400 maintenance forms. Henry was quiet for a moment. The starlight did something to the shape of the thing she'd said, made it land heavier than it might have in a brighter room. He'd spent his whole career being invisible in the best way, the man you only noticed when the water stopped, and it had never once occurred to him that being unseen might, to the right person, look like being trustworthy. "That's a lot of weight," he said finally, "to hang on some paperwork about valves." "It's not the valves. It's that you told the truth about the valves when no one important was watching." She turned fully to face him. "That is the only kind of person I can afford to have near me, and it is the only kind the court will never produce. So Lord Cassius has wanted my hand since we were children," she said, and the warmth cooled by several degrees. "Not me, my hand, the seat it sits beside. He has been arranging himself into position for 20 years, and tonight he arrived certain I would finally cross that hall to him. Instead, I crossed it to a man he has never heard of who fixes plumbing." She tilted her head, ears catching starlight. "He will not take that as a loss of a woman. He'll take it as a theft of property, and Cassius does not lose property. He recovers it, and he punishes the thief." "The thief being the obstacle," Henry said. "Which is me. I'm the obstacle/thief now. I've acquired a second felony and I've still been standing here under 10 minutes. To his surprise, Lianna laughed, an actual laugh, brief and startled out of her, one hand rising as if to catch it before it escaped in front of the wrong audience. It transformed her entirely, and Henry felt something shift in his chest that he elected, firmly, not to examine. "You keep doing that," she said, "making the terrible thing funny. It's a coping mechanism. My people invented it. It's arguably our only cultural export. It's a good export." She studied him a moment longer, then her expression sobered, the queen sliding back over the woman like a visor coming down. "You should know the rest, before the night goes any further. Because it's going to go further, Henry, whether either of us wishes it. And when it does, I'd rather you weren't surprised." Behind them, at the far end of the gallery, the tall arch admitted a single figure in silver. Lord Cassius crossed the gallery the way a debt collector crosses a room, unhurried, certain, enjoying the walk. 2 attendants trailed him at a respectful distance, and Henry noticed, with the specific attention of a man who spent his life noticing small mechanical wrongnesses, that they weren't attendants. They stood like soldiers. They stood like the answer to, "Is anyone going to try to kill me tonight?" "Your Majesty." Cassius bowed, exactly deep enough to be technically correct and not 1 degree deeper. "You left the celebration so quickly. The court is bereft. They so wish to congratulate you on your surprising choice." His pale eyes slid to Henry and did a swift, thorough appraisal, the way one might price a chair before deciding whether it was worth stealing or simply breaking. "Forgive me, I don't believe we've been introduced, though I confess I've already learned a great deal about you this evening. Henry, Water Reclamation, Sector 9, no title, no house, no lands, a thin smile. No people, should anything unfortunate happen to you far from home." "That last one's a common misconception," Henry said. "I have a whole department. Small, underfunded, deeply loyal to the man who signs the overtime. You'd be surprised what a plumber can arrange when properly motivated." Lianna stepped, subtly, half in front of him. A movement so slight most would have missed it, but Cassius did not miss it, and Henry watched the man clock it and file it away like a coin dropped into a slot. "He is under my protection, Cassius," she said, and the temperature of her voice had gone from starlight to the space between stars. "You know precisely what that means." "I know precisely what it means tonight," Cassius agreed pleasantly. "Traditions are such fragile things, Majesty. They mean one thing under the chandeliers, with the whole court watching. They mean rather less in a maintenance corridor at the far end of a very large ship." He inclined his head to Henry almost fondly. "Do enjoy the flagship. It's such a marvel of engineering, so many systems, so many places for a system to fail." And he turned and left, his 2 not attendants peeling off in a different direction than the one he'd come from, toward, Henry noted, the service passages. The moment the arch was empty, Henry exhaled. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad? He's already given the order, Lianna said grimly. That wasn't a threat, it was a courtesy. He's telling me it's done so I'll spend the night worrying instead of acting. We have perhaps an hour before this ballroom stops being the safest place on the ship and becomes the most obvious trap on it. She looked at him, and beneath the Queen's cold command, he could see the woman doing math she hated. I can hide you, but Cassius owns half the guard by now, and I won't know which half until they draw. Hiding is how frightened people die tidily. Then let's not hide, Henry said, and was mildly surprised to hear himself say it. Let's move. You know this court, but I know this ship. He was already thinking, the panic finally arriving on its usual delay and being rooted straight into the part of his brain that fixed things. Cassius said it himself. So many systems. He meant it as a threat, but it's also the answer. This flagship has 140,000 people aboard, and every one of them relies on air, water, gravity, and light that runs through infrastructure that I understand and he does not. He fights on the ballroom floor, so we don't fight on the ballroom floor. Something kindled in Lianna's expression, not hope exactly, but the sharper, better cousin of it, interest. You're saying we take him somewhere, he doesn't know the ground. I'm saying there's a whole ship under the ship, Henry said. Service crawls, reclamation corps, the maintenance spine that runs bow to stern. Nobody with a title has set foot in it in 100 years. It's hot, it's loud, it smells like a machine's armpit, and I know every meter of it because it's the only place on this floating palace where anyone's ever needed me. He was almost smiling now, which felt insane, which felt correct. You want to survive Cassius, come slum it with the plumbing. A queen, Lianna said slowly, does not crawl through the ship's armpit. A queen also doesn't cross a ballroom to dance with a water engineer, Henry pointed out. You've had a real day for firsts. What's one more? She looked at him for a long moment, the light-woven gown, the deep gold eyes, the pointed ears, the entire impossible fact of her. And then she reached down, gathered the shining fabric of her impossible dress in both hands, and tore a long clean slit up one side to free her legs to move. Lead, she said. But Henry, if you get me killed in a crawl space, I will haunt every valve you ever touch. That's fair, Henry said, and pulled open a service hatch that no noble had ever once noticed, into a corridor that hummed with the honest, deafening, beautiful machinery of the ship. And the two of them dropped out of the world of chandeliers and into his. Behind them, in the ballroom's golden hum, Lord Cassius was already smiling at a guard captain who no longer answered to the crown. And beneath them both, the Meridian's great engines turned and turned, indifferent to queens, keeping 140,000 souls alive on nothing but water, air, and the quiet competence of people no one ever thanked. The maintenance spine of the Meridian was everything Henry had promised and worse, which is to say it was magnificent. Pipes ran overhead in bundles thick as tree trunks, hissing and ticking with the pressure of a small world's worth of water. The light came in hard industrial strips, the air tasted of ozone and hot metal, and everything roared, a deep, tireless, mechanical roar that Henry had long ago stopped hearing and now heard again, freshly, through the ears of a queen who had never in her life been anywhere this loud. Lianna took it in with wide gold eyes, her glow flickering strangely against the steel, her torn gown of light snagging faintly on rivets. It's hideous, she said, with something that sounded almost like reverence. Isn't it? Henry said, already moving, already home. This is the real ship, everything up there floats on this. They moved fast and low through the reclamation corps, Henry navigating by memory, and by the small, illiterate wisdom of a man who knew which grates held weight, and which would sing if you stepped wrong. Twice they heard boots on the gantries above Cassius's people, spreading through the spine, hunting. Both times Henry pulled her sideways into a maintenance nook barely deep enough for two, and both times they stood pressed together in the dark and the noise, breathing, waiting, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her glow against his cheek, until the boots passed and they moved again. "They know the spine now," Lianna murmured after the second time. "He's learning your ground faster than I hoped." "He's learning the map of my ground," Henry corrected. "That's not the same as knowing it. Cassius sees a maze, I see a machine. And a machine has one thing a maze doesn't." He'd been leading them toward it the whole time without saying so, and now the passage opened out and up, and Lianna stopped short. They stood at the edge of the engine cathedral. It deserved the name. The chamber rose 10 stories into a vaulted dark, and at its heart turned the great reclamation heart of the ship, a colossal spinning core ringed in walkways and catwalks, wreathed in venting steam lit from below in slow shifting blues, so that the whole vast space breathed like a living lung of light. It was, Henry thought, watching her face, the only thing on the entire flagship grander than the ballroom, and no noble had ever seen it, and that struck him as the single most damning fact about the empire he could name. "Here," he said. "This is where we stop running. Here is where we're cornered," Lianna said, but she was looking at the catwalks, the choke points, the single wide gantry that any pursuer would have to cross in the open, and Henry saw the strategist in her arrive at the same place he had. "Oh no, here is where he's cornered. There's one approach. One approach, full light, and a floor I control the temperature of." Henry crossed to a battered control lectern bolted to the rail, a maintenance station, unglamorous, ignored for a century, and his fingers moved over it with the ease of a man playing an instrument only he remembered how to play. "Every valve, every vent, every gravity plate in this chamber routes through here. Cassius owns half the guard. He doesn't own thermodynamics. Nobody signed that over to him. They came, of course. Cassius was too proud not to lead it himself, and he strode onto the far end of the gantry in his silver finery, with 6 armed guards fanned behind him and the guard captain at his shoulder, and he stopped when he saw the 2 of them lit blue against the turning heart of the ship. And he laughed, a real laugh, delighted, echoing up into the dark. "You ran to a dead end," he called, spreading his arms. "Majesty, I expected better. And you," to Henry, almost warm, "you brought her to the loneliest room on the ship. There isn't a soul down here to hear anything at all." "That's the nicest thing anyone said about my workplace in years," Henry said. "But you've got one detail wrong. I didn't bring her to a dead end." His hand rested on the lectern. "I brought you to mine." He did not do anything dramatic. That was the part Cassius never understood, would never understand. That power down here wasn't a drawn blade, it was a decimal point. Henry simply reached out and reversed the pressure gradient on the gantry's stabilizer vents, and the walkway beneath Cassius's guards released a controlled, deafening, ship-standard decompression purge. A wall of superheated steam that erupted upward across the only approach, harmless if you knew it was coming, blinding and scalding, and utterly disorienting if you did not. The guards broke. 2 dropped their weapons. The captain went to one knee. And in the roar and the blue-lit fog, Lianna moved not a fleeing queen but the woman who had, she tried to tell him, been outmaneuvering assassins since childhood, and crossed the gantry through the steam Henry had opened a clean path through, and had Cassius's own ceremonial blade out of his own belt, and at his own throat before he'd finished flinching. The purge cut out. The fog thinned, and Lord Cassius stood very still, blinking at the mercy of a queen in a torn gown of light and an engineer at a maintenance desk, in the loneliest, loudest, most honest room aboard the entire imperial flagship. "You were right," Henry called across to her over the settling hiss. "I did get you into a crawlspace." "You also got me out," Lianna said, not lowering the blade. "I'll allow it." It would have been simpler, Lianna admitted afterward, to end Cassius there in the fog. Cleaner. The kind of solution the court would have understood. But she didn't, and when Henry asked her why hours later, she said only that killing him would have made it a story about a queen defending her property, and she was so very tired of being property, even the winning kind. So instead she made it a story about the truth, which was worse for Cassius by an order of magnitude. They didn't drag him back to the ballroom. They summoned the ballroom down to them. Lianna sent word up the spine. A queen's command still moved, even through a guard half-rotten with Cassius's coin. And within the hour the court came picking its way down into the engined cathedral in its jewels and its living silk. Appalled, fascinated, tripping over conduit in shoes never built for it. Until the whole gilded aristocracy of the Vale Imperium stood blinking in the blue light of the machine that had kept them all breathing their entire lives, without one of them ever bothering to learn its name. And then Henry, who had never addressed more than 4 people at once in his life, and had generally regretted 3 of those, stepped up to his battered maintenance lectern and did the single most devastating thing a man of his profession could do to a schemer. He read out the data, not accusations, not passion, just logs, the dull, damning, beautifully accurate logs that the ship's own systems had been keeping all along, because that was what he'd built them to do. Pressure signatures from a sabotaged coupling in Sector 4, timestamped to the hour Cassius had first learned the Queen meant to choose that night. Access records, dry as dust, showing a certain lord's private cipher opening maintenance channels no lord had any business opening. A rigged accident in a gravity plate 3 decks up, scheduled, patient, waiting for an obstacle to walk over it. Henry laid it all out in the flat, unbothered voice of a man filing a variance report, and every noble in that chamber who had smiled poison at him under the chandeliers now understood, with dawning horror, that the plumbing had been watching, and the plumbing kept records. You cannot flatter a timestamp. You cannot challenge a pressure differential to a duel. Cassius, who had spent 20 years mastering a court that ran on things unsaid, was undone in 10 minutes by a court's worth of things written down. When he tried to bluster, Henry simply pulled up the next log. When he tried to threaten, the guard captain, who had knelt in the steam and had a great deal to reconsider about which side kept better books, stepped away from him. By the end, Lord Cassius stood entirely alone in the loneliest room on the ship, which Henry felt had a certain justice to it. They took him away. The court, which had come down expecting a scandal, went back up having witnessed a reckoning, and told the story so many different ways by morning that all of them were somehow flattering to whoever was telling it. Empires are like that. The second dance came weeks later, not in the great ballroom. Lianna had, it turned out, developed a distaste for that particular floor. This was a smaller hall, quieter, the frozen galaxy chandeliers dialed low, and the guest list was short and largely composed of people Henry actually liked, including, at his insistence, most of the Sector 9 maintenance crew, who arrived deeply suspicious of the free food and left converts to it. She crossed the room to him again. She was in the habit of it now. But this time there was no gown of woven light, only a simpler thing the color of a planet's dawn, and this time when she stopped in front of him and held out her hand, she said it differently. "Will you dance with me?" she asked. No declarations, no traditions, no fine print. The almost smile had long since stopped being almost. Just the question. You may say no and nothing will happen to you at all, which I understand is a novelty. Henry looked at her hand. He looked at the woman woven not from light but from the far rarer material of having, once, told the truth when no one important was watching, and having been seen for it by the one person who was. "I should warn you," he said, taking it. "I still dance like a chair falling downstairs." "I know," said Lianna. "I've decided it's my favorite thing about you." And under the low soft galaxies, in a room that smelled faintly, gloriously, of the machine 2 decks below that kept them and everyone they loved alive, the Queen and the engineer began to dance, she leading, he counting under his breath, both of them laughing at some private thing the whole court would spend years failing to guess at. He found 4. He found 5. And somewhere around 6, holding the warm and impossible hand of a woman who had chosen sincerity over the entire glittering weight of an empire, Henry stopped counting altogether and simply danced. Yes, friends, Lianna and Henry's story comes to an end here. Don't forget to hit the like button, Leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below and subscribe to Sci-Fi Traveler for more stories. Stay tuned for new adventures. See you again very soon.